Hello and welcome to Rare's Ramble. I'm Michael.
And I'm Deanna.
And today we're going to be talking about Outlander, the book and the series. Just the first book. Because the series is called Outlander and the book's also called Outlander. So just to be clear. This is our cat Evie. She's very cute and very annoying. I don't know how well you can see her. She's about 3 months old and well, you hear she's going to be pretty big when she gets older. Right now she's just a little furball.
I think she's interested in the microphone. Yeah, so hopefully she doesn't walk all over my laptop, but we might have to stop every once in a while in case she deletes my outline. So I finally finished reading Outlander, which was quite a feat for me, and it's kind of a long story. I mean, it's literally a long story, but I mean, in my case, my personal experience with Outlander, it's kind of a long story. So in my case, I grew up listening to my mom talk about Outlander, and so I kind of knew a lot about the characters before I ever read or even watched the show. It was just kind of part of my childhood. In fact, she actually, I think, first read Outlander before I was even born, so it's like that's definitely her series for sure. It's her favorite story of all time. So naturally, about 9 years ago when it was announced that it was coming to Stars as a series, my mom was really thrilled about it, and so I actually watched the first, I think, season or two with her, but there were definitely certain scenes that I didn't watch. Then she stopped. I think by season 3, there were some things that changed with the filming that she wasn't a huge fan of.
Well, one thing in particular she always mentions, but...
Yeah, which I just want to quick say spoiler warning for this video. I think that's kind of obvious, but I just want to throw it out there.
And also trigger warning for sexually bad things.
Yeah, definitely sexual assault, so...
We'll be a little bit vague about it for YouTube's sake, but if you have read the series or watched the show, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If we say a night with Blackjack Randall, I mean, how obvious would that be to you if you've read it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know this series, lots of things happen, so most anything we talk about could be considered a spoiler. We'd recommend anyone watching this have watched at least through season 4, because that's how far we've gotten, but I guess if you don't care, you can watch. Spoiler alert, though.
And in my mom's case, she stopped watching the series after the long-anticipated scene of Claire and Jamie being reunited after 20 years, which that was season 3, I believe?
Yeah, episode 6 or something like that. They really dragged it out. That's something I have a little bit of a pet peeve with. At the end of season 2, they teased that Claire might be going back in time, and then she didn't at the beginning of season 3, and then for like a long time there was like talks of preparation for her to go back and all this other stuff, and will she, won't she, even though, I mean, I feel like it just wouldn't make sense for the story if she didn't go back. But, you know, it's a drama. I understand why. I just think it felt too long to me, personally. But it made me watch it, so I don't know.
It was kind of cute. You were really, like, on the edge of your seat, like, when are they going to be together? But yeah, from what I heard anyways, because I've only read the first book, but according to my mom, when they were finally reunited, it was a very emotional scene, and or at the very least for her, it was, like, her favorite scene, I believe, in, like, all of Outlander, and so to have... Yeah, because it's a very important scene, and so to have it kind of brushed over, it was very quick, kind of wrapped up quickly, and...
It felt a little awkward.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was intentional with, like, the tone they were going for, but I don't think that's what a lot of people, your mom included, would have wanted out of that scene. So...
And so for her, she was like really heartbroken with how it did pan out, and she kind of just entirely lost interest to continue watching. And so I could understand where a scene like that would cause you to lose interest. But in my case, having not like actually grown up reading the books, I only grew up hearing about it. I was kind of curious to maybe watch the show again and maybe read the book because we were invited to a trip to the UK with my brother and his wife. And so that kind of kickstarted that because I was like, if I'm going to Scotland, it'd be kind of cool to consume some Scottish media of some kind, and like what else other than Outlander, you know?
I mean, technically it was made by an American, but takes place in Scotland.
You know what I mean.
For a while. That's another thing that I was not ready. I didn't realize that the story just kind of went all over the place, quite literally, geographically.
Mm-hmm.
The intro sequence to season 3 with all of the like Jamaicans and like the dancing ritual thing, I was like, oh, wait, what?
What country are you going to this season?
Because season 2 they went to France, and like that's not a far cry from Scotland, it's across the pond. Jamaica's a little bit different. And then this is another pet peeve I have. I'm only going to say things up to season 4 because, again, that's what we've watched up to. Technically, we've gotten to season 5 but haven't started it yet. Does anyone else feel like Claire and Jamie's decision in the show to stay in America felt kind of arbitrary? Like, they're like, oh, Brienne is going to live here eventually. Yeah, but like, what does that have to do with you? In their eyes, they weren't ever going to see her again, so like, it's just a symbolic thing. You're going to base your whole life around that? Okay.
I think it could also just be like just wanting to start a new beginning somewhere.
Well, that's just, I mean, I don't remember if they said anything like that. I feel like the stated reason, or at least the reason I remember being stated, felt I mean, things happened after that and sort of retroactively justified the decision, like Murtaugh being in America, but yeah, that's just a pet peeve of mine.
Speaking of Murtaugh, my mom did say that there were some other things that deviated from the book, and something includes Murtaugh. I don't know what it is because
Well, she said he was never sent to America after Ardsmuir, which I'm so confused about.
Yeah.
Like, is he not in the books after the first couple of books?
Outlander fans, let us know. Specifically, book readers of Outlander, let us know. So I decided to consult an Outlander subreddit. This involved fans for both the series, the book series, and the TV series. Just curious to see how accurate the series follows the books, because I was kind of skeptical after what my mom said. And at least, according to the majority of the people there, they said that they liked both for different reasons, and that it's important to view them as kind of like separate stories in a way, but they still said that the series followed the books pretty accurately. Some things played out a little bit differently for the sake of just kind of condensing things.
To my knowledge, it feels like they end up at the same destination almost every time, and the way in which it gets there is just slightly different. Some adaptations take great liberties and even like big plot points. It feels like they're just smaller deviations that are mainly meant to make things more straightforward, or at least that's how I understand it. I haven't read the book. She has.
Well, and as for book 1 and the first season, it follows very, very accurately. There definitely have been some things that were different, like the whole witch trial did play out a little bit differently. Like, for instance, Claire and Galus never had a discussion about who had to sacrifice themselves. Galus kind of decided on the spot that she was going to sacrifice herself for Claire.
And I feel like that's what I mean. Because, like, Galus still sacrificed herself. And Claire learned that she was a time traveler. So those were the two main things, and they both happened just slightly differently.
Yeah. Nessie had a cameo in book 1, which I wasn't expecting. I kind of don't, I guess, blame the filmmakers for not including that, because that would be kind of difficult to film and get CGI involved and everything. And it was only there for the sake of having a witness at the witch trials be like, I saw her summon Nessie. So that was kind of wild. When I did read Nessie like appearing, I was like, what?
Yeah, I feel like that's just like a thing with the mediums involved, right? Because it's very easy and almost expected. It's like, oh, it takes place in northern Scotland. You might as well make a reference to Nessie in the books. There's no additional cost involved with that. Meanwhile, I mean, in a show, imagine how much the budget would balloon if you were to like even do 20 seconds of a Nessie shot, you know? And it would only be for like 20 seconds. And it's like for the sake of somebody having evidence against Claire in the witch trial, which like I think people already had other quote unquote evidence, and at least in the show they were just making shit up, which was kind of the point because they were prejudiced against women, I guess. So ultimately pretty unnecessary.
Yeah, but for the most part, like, if things were condensed, it was for, I feel like, pretty obvious reasons. I can't speak for the rest of the series because, again, I'm kind of in the dark on how much it deviates the rest of the TV show. I'm kind of going mostly based off of little bits and pieces I picked up from my mom over time.
I feel like one deviation that would be maybe more controversial is what happened to Roger.
Poor Roger. My baby.
Dog face. Where I feel like that's one of the bigger deviations I've heard of. Again, this is secondhand knowledge from her mom about how the misunderstanding subplot revolving around Roger in season 4/book 4 happened. Because I do feel like that's one of the cases where I can think the actions involved would make you feel at least a little bit differently about the characters, and the characters are the most important thing. So it feels worth mentioning to me because... And I'm not going to try to explain everything that happened because it was like several episodes worth of like specific amounts of information being divulged, and I don't want to try to explain all that right now. But suffice it to say, in the book, I feel like I actually dislike Jamie a little bit more and am more on Brianna's side with the misunderstanding involved because more information was shared, which should have led to less of a misunderstanding in the book, whereas in the show, specifically the necessary information that would have stopped all of this from happening was specifically not told. So I'm sort of more on Jamie's side because to his eyes, he was doing what seems like the universally correct thing to do. Or, well, I shouldn't say universally, but commonly understood the correct thing. I still think it's crazy that Ian, his first thought was to sell a man to the Indians, but you know, that's I feel like that's actually kind of something that's swept under the rug.
It's like, damn, son. That's a little harsh.
I got a medal. So yeah, if you have any thoughts about that in the comments, you could let us know. I feel like that's one of the few instances, though, where the book versus the show ends up diverging more than usual.
To our understanding.
Let
us know, book fans, in the comments, your biggest gripe with something that might have played out differently in the show. So for the TV series, Brianna just looks stupid, but in the book series, Jamie looks like a huge asshole, so...
Yeah.
You know, pick your poison.
I'm gonna go on a slight tirade. That is my issue with any misunderstanding subplot. I'm not saying nobody can do it. I'm not saying you couldn't even execute it pretty well, but inevitably with a misunderstanding plot, there has to be somebody somewhere who is kind of stupid for not saying something to somebody else, or even if like it's not a character being stupid, you can just feel how much of a plot contrivance it is. I'm not a fan. I'm going to complain about it every time I see it. Maybe one of these days I'll find one that I actually like, but I kind of doubt it.
Communication is key. But just hearing from the Outlander subreddit that the majority of the people there said that they liked both for different reasons, I found that to be a positive because usually, especially when you're consulting fans, you'll know if the film or series adaptation is shit. And the fact that they weren't saying that, I was like, that's a good sign. And so I decided to, I guess, make the plunge. And I know you were really reluctant to actually start watching the show, and I was like, I think it'll be fun though.
I mean, I had heard good things. I had heard good things from a mega fan, so you know, I feel like that's something to be taken with a grain of salt. I think just like, I mean, you look at the thickness of this book, I don't know how well that's coming across. The first book alone, I don't know how many of them there are, like 8 to 10, is 300,000 words. That's a big boy.
Yeah.
And I know that obviously the show is shorter, but it's still pretty lengthy for a show. It's going on 8 seasons now, and most seasons have 8 to 10 episodes that are all like roughly an hour long, so that's quite some time. I don't like dedicating my time to things that I don't know if it'll be worth it. It's been worth it so far, but yeah, I have an issue. I can't watch too many TV shows because I just feel such a
commitment.
Yeah.
I get it. It's a really fucking long story. Interestingly, throughout the years, there were like other people who approached Diana, like offering like movie deals, like, yeah, we'll make a movie out of it. And she's like, you're not wrapping up fucking everything in one fucking movie, pal.
You know how big my first book is, right?
Yeah, they're like, yeah, we'll have to cut out some things. It's like, you can't do that with this. And I'm really glad that we started actually watching it, kind of prepping for a UK trip, because it just, I don't know about you, but it just helped with the UK trip because I feel like there's just more appreciation for like the culture also while we were in Scotland.
I do feel like it provided some historical context to some of the things that we were seeing when we were in Scotland. Not that the books are necessarily perfectly historically accurate, but they are based on real things that did happen. So I do think that added to my appreciation. But I gotta say, like, when we were there and we were hearing about a lot of their history, I was actually more fascinated than I thought I'd be. I think I would have liked it anyway. Maybe it just made me like it that little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny because neither of us are, like, huge into... It's like we're not history nerds.
Yeah, so we're really not like history nerds by any means. I did quite like Scotland when I was watching the show, though. Season 1 specifically, and 2 a little bit. I just feel like the reason why I'm not that into history and like textbooks and like visiting locations is because it's all in a museum and it's being told in a semi-monotone voice, and they give you names and dates and locations, and they don't really mean much of anything to me. And something like Outlander, which is roughly based on real history, actually kind of provides what I'm looking for. I need a narrative of some kind. That's what my brain responds to. And so, yeah, if anybody wants to watch it for historical reasons, take it with a grain of salt. But I mean, that could actually help you like learn some real things. Because, I mean, like, for instance, the Battle of Culloden was a real thing that happened. Bonnie Prince Charlie was a real guy who really did try to take back the throne from the British and be a Scottish Catholic ruler to England.
And it was really interesting when we were in Scotland, because we had a tour guide that was talking about different stories that have brought more tourism to Scotland, which they really like. But it was funny because she talked about Braveheart and the things that were wrong with it, and then she talked about Outlander and the things that were right about it, and I felt like that was a good thing to hear, I guess. Like, it shows the accuracy, and she was talking about how they really love Outlander actually because of the historical accuracy, and also just taking time to have like the proper kilts and even making them correctly.
Yeah, I was going to say the majority of the compliments were on the wardrobe specifically, because apparently that was quite expensive for the costuming department, but worth it in the long run. It's very accurate to the time.
Yeah, like they used the proper plants for dyes that they would have used in that region back in that era for dyeing the kilts, and it's little things like that that I personally love, because I'm someone who, with stories, I like things to be accurate. I just really like that, and so to see that, I was like, oh yeah.
To me, it's more like, well, that's neat sort of thing, but it is neat. Yeah. I do like it.
I can't think of something in particular that is actually inaccurate that I learned on our tour anyways. This is just according to our tour guide, but there are no wolves in Scotland. And if you're a book reader, you know that there's a problem with that actually for the books. Anyways.
I actually haven't seen, I don't think that same scene that happened in the book happened in the show, so maybe they were trying to be more accurate that way.
Well, yeah, I think maybe they realized then. They did pay kind of homage to the book by including, I did notice, there was like a wolf howl when Claire was out of the Wentworth prison and trying to get back in. And I was like,
that was a reference.
yeah, it felt like a reference. Kind of like, yeah, we know that this was in the book, we're not going to film it. And also, it'd be fucking hard to film. You can't expect Katrina to wrestle a dog.
Yeah, I feel like that's another case of, like, do you want the CGI budget to be 3 times as much? That's another pet peeve of mine is in season 4, they kept being like, this is Fraser's Ridge, it's so beautiful. Several distinct shots were there with several characters where they're like, Fraser's Ridge, amazing, beautiful. It was like a CGI background. I wouldn't have cared if they tried to find some sort of like real ridge to take pictures of. If it wasn't as picturesque, I wouldn't have minded. It feels more ironic that they kept saying how beautiful it is to a clearly CGI backdrop. And that's like one of the only times in the series I can think where like something like that happens where it's like very clearly CGI because they're bringing attention to it.
I don't mean to bring everything back to Twilight, but it just makes me think of like Renez being like, oh, she's so beautiful. she's like the fuggliest thing you've ever seen.
It's like a fucking uncanny valley robot looking ass baby.
Anyways, but at long last, after years and years and years of hearing about the books, I finally started reading Outlander, and I wish I had like the normal cover. I'm someone who's, I guess, more of a traditionalist and I like the original covers, but when I got this one, we were actually at a book signing to meet Diana, and this is what they had. They were advertising the show at that time, and that's all what they had left over, but it's okay, because I have a signed copy now. Fun fact, because when I was meeting her, I decided to ask her kind of a silly question, and I asked her what her favorite ride at Disneyland was, and apparently her favorite ride is Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which I thought was awesome, because who doesn't love, a good tale of a toad, drinking and driving and then going to hell. And also just another little fun tidbit, when I was watching the show with my mom, I actually made her a little Jamie doll, and I'm not saying it's great looking, but I did my best. I hand sewed him. And
I think it's good. It's stylized.
Thanks. His cravat is huge and terrible, but it was made with love.
You can tell it's him.
Yeah, and I also made her the ring that you at least see in the show, because you can't see it in the book because it's imagined, but I was going based off of the show, and because I was taking a jewelry class at that time. It was like one of the greatest classes I ever took, but that was one thing that I made for her, and she loved it, so that was fun. The timing of reading Outlander was honestly perfect, though, because I had recently joined a book club, as we mentioned in our last video, and with our book club, we were asking everyone to come to the table with a couple recommendations to read, and me being very smart, I recommended Outlander. That is just a beast to read for a book club. I did tell them we didn't have to, but they were actually really stoked, and they're like, no, we want to read this, and I was like, awesome. And it just so happened to be that the month we were reading Outlander, I was in the UK, and so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for reference, they usually do a book a month, but that one took 2.
Well, for me, it was actually 3, and I'm behind with reading the other book. That might also be on the table. Anyways, I wouldn't say I'm like a slow reader. I'm like medium to semi-fast, but my issue is that I put the book down more than other readers, I think, and I go off and do other activities, and so it takes me a while to get...
There you have a life.
It takes me a while to get through like one book alone, and so this one took me 3 months, and this was me trying to cram in as much reading as I could, but we've had a busy few months for obvious reasons, so I was grateful when I did actually get through it, and I don't mean that as an offense for the book, because it was a good book, it's just, it's fucking huge.
So now that all that has been said, what do we actually think of Outlander? The book, the first one, and what we've seen of the show thus far.
I will say, I like to start with negatives first, but just kind of starting with some cons here, I will say that there's definitely a lot of sexual assault. And like, I understand that some...
happened.
Yeah, I understand that villains will do villainous things, obviously.
But not every villain in real life would be a rapist. It seems like they all are, though, in these books.
Yeah, because, like, villains can be evil for different reasons, but I kind of feel like just about every single villain is rapey, and I feel like it kind of feels like it's maybe Diana's crutch and her way to signal that a character is bad, but there's a lot of different ways you can show that a character is a bad person. It doesn't have to be rape, and I guess that's a gripe that I have.
And vice versa, like, good characters wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
John Grey, for example.
I know that you mentioned something that you weren't too much of a fan of, just like the story kind of feels like it's all over the place for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the appeal. I can see that now. It never gets stale. There's always new locations, new characters, new drama. So that's good. With something as long as this is, in, like a serialized format, it's easy for things to feel like they've kind of come to a standstill. I even sort of felt that at the beginning of season 4, because things were like just a little bit too good for them for a little bit too long, and then really bad things happened, so that kind of evened it out. Not that I usually want that to happen, but you don't want it to be just like a story about people having fun and living a normal life, because that's not exciting. But it does feel like when you think back to earlier books or earlier seasons and you think of things you liked about the show back then, certain characters that were there at that time that aren't anymore, certain plot lines that you may have liked that resolved themselves, and yeah, even like certain settings, because we have a fondness for Scotland that's not really in the story anymore. I don't know if they're going to go back, maybe, but it's been America-centric this season. So it does feel like some things kind of get like left in the dust, and it can be easy if you like get too attached to one part of the story to be like, oh, well, I'm not as interested anymore because I liked X character and they're, not dead or anything, but they're just not in the story anymore, so...
It is nice, though, when they do pop up later and you're like, yo!
that is actually a phenomenon that I've noticed. I was talking to you about this the other day. Whenever it's been a long time, and this happens in this series quite a bit, where a character hasn't been around, but then they do show up for an episode or two, I point at the screen and I go, hi you, hi John Grey, hi Fergus, because like they're characters I like, I want to see more of them, and there's just so many characters, so many settings, so many plot lines that it's impossible to keep most characters around. The only ones who are very consistent throughout the whole are Jamie and Claire. Where's
Ned, our original gangster?
I know. I am quite upset.
He wasn't as
He
much.
was so cool. He was my OG. And he just kind of... they mentioned he was still around after the 20-year jump, but you didn't see him. I'm just gonna assume he's being awesome somewhere off screen.
I hate to say it, but he wasn't like as cool and badass in the books. Like,
I don't care. I didn't read it, so.
he was fine, but he wasn't like as much of a gunslinger, the surprising gunslinger as we saw like in the show,
Jeez, man.
Yeah. Looking like Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin looking ass. Benjamin Franklin was a ladies' man too.
Though I do love the description in the book, because it was mentioned that with his appearance, Claire couldn't help but look at him and like not smile. And
what a sweet old man.
I know, that's how I feel, looking at him in the show. My next con here, I was kind of surprised with myself, because as I was reading it, I always heard positive things about the book, and I guess as I was reading it, surprisingly, it wasn't my personal cup of tea with the way it was written. I'm really sorry, Mom, if you're watching this. I'm not going to say it's like badly written, because it's not at all, it's just the style of it.
The pace.
Yeah, it is very fast-paced, but I feel like there was actually quite a bit of telling versus showing. Like, it's not that there wasn't any showing. There were plenty of instances where you see a lot of showing and it's done really well, but I do feel like there was more telling in it in comparison to other books that I've read as of recently. And I feel like that kind of goes to show that if you are being told constantly, like, oh, show, don't tell, that's not always true because, like, Diana got away with it and it's like a huge success, so do you, I guess.
But you should try not to because it ended up being something that you didn't like about it.
Yeah, but here's kind of the weird thing with that. Like, it was a lot of telling and I found myself going like, oh, this was something that was only stated, while in the TV show it was shown and maybe even took up like a whole episode. But I think for the sake of pacing for this beast of a novel, I think it's okay, because otherwise I think it would be like 3 times as big if it actually did go into detail with literally everything. So even though I'm listing it as a negative, it's also kind of like not, depending on how you look at
It
it.
feels like a necessary evil.
Yeah, I guess that's the perfect way to say it.
I mean, technically she could have written it any way she wanted. Could have gotten rid of some things or shuffled around, but... And I mean, who are we to say? I mean, we're not the ones who wrote this highly successful book, so...
Yeah, we're not published, so...
Could be soon.
Could be.
Could be.
I'm actually glad that we were watching, or that we had at least watched the first couple seasons when I was reading Outlander, because I imagine if you went into it very blindly, it could maybe be a little overwhelming, or at least it would be for me. I don't know if I have like a short attention span or like shit memory, I'm not sure. Maybe undiagnosed ADHD, but like I sometimes struggle to like keep track of people. And the fact that I already could sort of place spaces to names with this book and already know what was going to be happening next, it helped me for sure while I was reading it.
Well, that kind of connects to what I was saying, because like there's so many characters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not surprised that you'd have a hard time remembering if you hadn't seen them, because it is easier to remember a face.
Mm-hmm. Getting into prose now, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Jamie's hot.
I mean, everyone has the hots for Jamie, and, the women, and he turns men gay, it's...
I don't swing that way, but I can see it.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Shout out to red-haired men. You don't have enough positive representation, and I've actually decided that in my next story that I'm reading, I'm gonna have the main and not antagonist. I'm gonna have the main protagonist be a red-haired man, and he's gonna be hot for you red-headed men out there. You're welcome.
Gee, I wonder why you would feel incentivized to give red-headed people positive media attention.
Not biased at all. Which, I do have some Scottish blood, and I actually have some Mackenzie blood, so, I tried to pick out a scarf that was, like, maybe the colors. It's probably not the right ones, but it's okay. We can move on.
For a pro on my end, I do think that out of all of the romances I've seen on screen, it is one of the most believable. There are some issues, such as both of them have fiery temperaments, which isn't the best for both of them to be that way in a relationship. I guess it makes for a good drama story, but I do think they work really well together.
Well, it can also show you that, like, compromise and communication is very important, and even though they have very fiery tempers, like, they have to talk through things, they have to compromise, and that's just part of relationships. Like, if you can't do that, you're fucked. That's just the truth, if I'm being honest. You have to compromise and communicate. Anyways, that was actually one thing that I did want to mention, just that I like that this is one of the few stories I can think of where it's not a romance where they get together, they live happily ever after, and it ends, and that's most love stories that we see, which is really sad. But this is one of the few instances that I can think of where they get married, and now it's like, this is just the beginning of the story, and I think that's something that should be portrayed way more often, that we just never see. And
to be fair, the way that they got away with that was by creating drama in the next generation's relationship.
I guess, but I don't know, you just don't see too many like movies and shows where you see like a happily married couple. Like, you'll be hard pressed to think of examples.
Well, that's something that your mom had said to us, and that was something that did intrigue me about it, and I will say it does hold up. So that's probably the biggest plus for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I always think of my mom too, because she always stressed that marriage is the beginning and it shouldn't be the end. And it makes me wonder how many other relationships have like struggled because we only see the happily ever after represented in media, but you never see like what it takes to keep them together.
Yeah, it's definitely like an issue some people face where they just like don't really consider what you do next.
Yeah, it's like life continues.
One bit of advice I've heard in terms of like relationships is, it might be tempting to be like, I got married, I achieved what I was trying to do, I don't have to try anymore. Don't do that. Obviously, both of you are still alive. You want to keep the feelings you had before. You gotta still just like act like you're not married, act like you're still dating, try to impress her still.
Go on dates.
Go on dates. Do fun shit.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like, why'd you even do all this?
Yeah, do you like them? Do you have fun with them? Can you imagine, like, having a piece of cake and be like, that was really good dessert. Now I don't need to ever have it ever again.
I can check that off my bucket list.
One of the other pros, we kind of already touched base on, just the historical accuracy. Obviously, it's not going to be exact. It's a time travel story. It's fiction. It's low fantasy. So naturally, things are going to change. But a lot of what we do see is very accurate. Based upon just even what we heard from our tour guide. This is just a personal pro for me. I've discovered more recently that for me, I prefer low fantasy. I'm not a high fantasy person, so I'm sorry. I know like you really love Lord of the Rings, and I didn't mind it when I watched it again with you, but I'm not someone who would like willingly pick up Lord of the Rings. Like the most I like that's higher fantasy, I guess, is like Legend of Zelda, but I just don't care for high fantasy. It's fine if you like it, I wish I liked it more. I'm trying to get into it, as you can tell from maybe our stack of books here anyways.
I find it interesting that you call it low fantasy because it's really the lowest fantasy you can get. I feel like it is like so incredibly grounded to reality that one might even think that there's not really magic in it. Then there are like times where like it's a bit more present, so there's definitely magic in that universe, but it's like such a small thing that like only every now and again does it really pop up, and it's not like the focus most of the time, and then it like goes away without any fanfare.
Yeah, but then there's just Nessie randomly.
That's what I mean, is like Nessie's there for about 20 seconds, it's not explained, don't think about it, don't worry about it, we're back to the real world.
And the stones are magic.
Yeah, and that's like sort of semi-explained through genes. That's a later part of the story spoiler that your mom told us about. I still don't really understand how it's meant to work, but genes, I guess.
I mean, I find it fascinating, but again, I like low fantasy. Like, I think if something is too high fantasy, like my problem is that I just have a hard time, like, taking it seriously, I guess. I'm like, oh, cool, there's dragons, I guess, whatever. But like,
meanwhile, I'm like, this isn't enough of an escape. It's in like the real world. I don't want to think about like this character having to do their taxes or some shit.
Well, I do understand that because I did also discover with our book club things that were set in modern day and everything was normal. I was like, I don't want to read about your fucking job.
Yeah, so I guess this is like the happy medium for you.
Yeah, so in that case, like, this is like right up my alley. So that was something that I discovered about myself.
Maybe it's the fact that it's like historical, and so it's not as much like the world as we know it.
Yeah, because I think that is the escapism for me, because I really love period pieces, and I think just because it feels like an escapism from modern day, but I still like that it's realistic to history, even though I'm not a history nerd. I don't know how to explain it.
I wonder how many things you've watched that you liked and you're like, oh, I love how like everything was in that time, and then you like later learned that it was very inaccurate. Did that ruin it for you?
Well, there's definitely some things that I see in period pieces where maybe it's a more modern spin on something, and I get hung up over really dumb things where I'm like, you wouldn't have worn that during that era, you bitch. But,
Can you tell what kind of writer she is? I'll give you a hint. She once spent a couple of hours trying to figure out, like, if refrigerators had been invented in, like, 1800s France.
well, not a refrigerator.
Oh, wait, was it a stove or something?
I mean, they had cast iron stoves.
What was the thing you looked up?
It was, I think it was like toilets or plumbing.
Indoor plumbing. Yeah, that was it.
Because there's a difference between when something was invented and when something was like common household items.
Right.
Because no matter what you look up, they're always like, the Greeks had this. And I'm like, I'm not talking about fucking ancient Greece.
It's France.
It always comes back to ancient Greece and Egypt. It doesn't matter what it is. So false.
You just see like a hieroglyph and they're like...
And our next pro here being that it overall just has really well written characters. I like that you can see the different flaws and different strengths and motives of the characters, and it's all really interwoven, and at least to me they feel like real people.
I will say that there's sort of like a large divide in terms of depth between like main characters and side characters, and even a like big gap between Jamie and Claire and almost any other character. But I wouldn't say that any of them are like badly characterized. It's just that most side characters don't last long enough to be developed very much.
I will say that though, they usually pop up later, certain characters, which could add to the characterization. You might learn some new things about them. But
yeah, and I guess I am entirely forgetting about, I guess there was a spin-off series with John Gray, so I'm sure that has characterization as well. So maybe I'm just ill-informed.
It's quite possible. I mean,
I like look it up, and every side character has their own spin-off.
there is actually one little gripe with characterization. Then we'll go back to pros, don't worry. But it is definitely, and I can understand why they all have this flaw, but it's like Jamie, Claire, Jenny, like a lot of people.
Just anger issues.
Well, more stubbornness than anything, but also a pretty hot temper. Oh, and Brianna, of course. Which I get it, because it's like in the family, you know? I can understand that, but it would be nice to see maybe a few other, like, flaws mixed in there.
Yeah, something else for one of them would be nice.
And that leads to our next positive here, that being Claire's characterization, and just overall being a really strong female heroine, and I feel like that's something that's been lacking these days in various Hollywood movies.
Well, that's not to say they haven't been trying.
Oh, they've been trying. And failing miserably at it. And that's a huge gripe I have. You know, maybe we'll even do a future video that's just strictly on strong female characters. I think that could be fun if you guys are interested, but...
Let us know.
Yeah, let us know. And, like, although Claire has, like, a fiery temper, what I like is that she doesn't, like, repress her other emotions. Like, she's still... Like, we see her cry, we see her say sweet things to Jamie, and...
Like a person.
Yeah, she's a person. And she's someone who isn't like, I don't need no man. Fuck man. She's, like, very much in love, and her original motives were to go through the stones back to Frank.
And you could never say that her wanting Frank or Jamie ever stopped her from doing like other things that she wanted to do in her life. Like, she didn't just like give up her own ambitions because she was married.
I mean, yeah, because even though she's married, you know, originally to Frank and then later to Jamie, like, she still definitely has her own, like, identity, you know, in the beginning, that being a nurse and later being a surgeon. Like, she's definitely going to the beat of her own drum. She's not like, I'm a housewife now, I guess I'll shut the fuck up and never do anything else ever again. So yeah, she's definitely like a strong, independent woman, and I guess I just appreciate that because as a woman, you're allowed to have a career and be in love. It's possible. I feel like what makes her a really strong character for the series as a whole is just that she has abilities that are very useful for the plot, that being her healing abilities and being able to perform surgery and just overall knowledge with medicine. It's very, very important for the story, and so it just feels like a really smart addition to have included that with Claire's character. Because sometimes you can include maybe a trait or strength for a character in a story, and it's kind of like not important for the story. Maybe it's just
it's
kind
like
of
established, and then it never really pays off in any way.
yeah. And I think what I also like about it is that it's not something that's just said and moved on with. You see it over and over in the books and in the series, and so it's not like she has to preach that she is knowledgeable in this area. She shows it throughout the story, which I think is very important with storytelling.
And notably, it's not fighting that she's proficient in.
But yeah, that's a good point, because I feel like a lot of people have in mind that in order for a female character to be strong, she has to be like physically strong, which is not what we mean by a strong female character.
I mean, if you think about real life, there are so many ways you could be strong, quote unquote. You could be proficient in a lot of things. I'm not saying women couldn't be physically strong, but there's just an abundance of that kind of character, and it's not interesting anymore.
No. And so this was like a breath of fresh air, and I mean, as for Claire, she definitely had moments where she had to like kill someone, in an act of self-defense.
Hey, she's not defenseless, she's not harmless.
Yeah, she's not harmless, but it's not like she's like a bodybuilder and
right.
like punching people in the face all the time. But her strength is lying in her abilities and knowledge, and also just, kind of paving her own path in the story and making her own decisions. And so there's a lot of ways that you can show a female character being strong. And I feel like this is a really good example of that. Like, if you're trying to write a strong female character in your story, maybe take some notes from Outlander, because you see really good examples in it.
And I think the reason it's not more common is because it's so much easier to write a flatter character who just punches things. To write an actually three-dimensional character like Claire, where she has hobbies and interests and romantic feelings and a temper, and there are all these aspects to her. It's not just one thing, or at most a couple of things. When I think of bad stereotypes of strong female characters, I think of Captain Marvel. That's the first thing that always comes to mind. And looking at that, you can just always see that in any situation she's in, the writers always defaulted to she can physically overpower them, and that's the only thing that they ever did with her, which is not interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of overlap that you see with Hollywood trying to write female or strong female characters and failing, and also a lot of overlap with the not like other girls trope that we see. And that's another thing I would gladly do another video on if you're interested.
I have a lot to say about that, so
yeah. And it's just very tiring to see, because it's like these writers don't realize that girls have personalities and are interesting, complex people of their own like anyone else. And
yeah, if you're a male writer writing a female, you could just think, what do I feel, and attribute that to a woman because they're humans. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And you could write them however you want to, because there's bound to be someone out there that's probably fits that description, because we're all different human beings. There are some things that I like that are very girly girl-esque, and other things that are more tomboy-like, and it's there's no real rhyme or reason to it. We're just different people.
Yeah.
I like my tea sets, but I play video games too. And this is my personal rule of thumb, just something that I've noticed with other movies, shows, books, where maybe the writers are trying really hard to portray their female lead as a strong character. There's a mistake that I see popping up pretty frequently, and they feel the need to have some kind of speech about how she's strong and I can stand up for myself, or whatever it is. And I feel like the moment that you try to insert some kind of speech is where you immediately fail. Like, for instance, Claire doesn't really feel the need to explain that she's like a strong independent woman. She shows that she's a strong independent woman. Like, you wouldn't tell people that you're funny if you want to come off as a funny person, because once you do that, you're not funny.
Or you would never say, I'm cool, because once you say that, that means you're uncool.
Yeah, and then you're immediately like a loser.
Mm-hmm.
And that applies with pretty much anything that you might be trying to portray with your characters. If you feel the need to have a speech, you're probably doing it wrong.
So those are our thoughts on Outlander. Let us know what you guys think.
And if you're interested in seeing at all some pictures and fun stuff from our UK trip, you can actually see it on my brother's channel. I'll have his channel name in the description or on screen, whichever works best. But yeah, check him out. He has videos from other trips, including our Paris trip where you proposed to me, so that's fun.
Yeah, you'll see us, you'll see them, and you'll see lots of cool places we went to.
Yeah.
I've been Michael.
And I've been Deanna.
And remember to not touch strange rocks you see in the woods. Unless you want to.
Yeah, you can meet a handsome red-headed man.
Bye.
Bye.